to make it, there she is. Okay, I'm assuming that's what you're looking at. Okay, because I can't see the screen, so I can just see the little bit. So, yeah, Dennis is right. I really honestly don't know a lot about oil. I know my dad was a pumper, and he would come home and his clothes were covered with oil, and my uncles, Snide, Chubb, Jack, and who's the other one? I forget. We're all pumpers, and they were 5 powerhouses, and you could hear them. When I was a kid, I used to think it sounded like the heartbeat in the woods because you could hear them pumping away at random times. I grew up in Bingham, which, if everybody knows where that is, it's between Mount Alton and Cyclone, and I tell people it was the best place on earth to grow up. We also had an oil jack in our side yard, so I know a little bit about oil, but nothing like this audience does. But I'll do my best tonight. I'm going to do one called Before the Boom. Now, what does that exactly mean? What is the boom? And I mean, the word boom means explosion, and that's pretty much what happened about 1881. It's very specific. They say they discovered oil then. Well, you don't discover oil. It's not like suddenly they walked out one day and tripped over an oil well and we discovered oil, because it took years, really, for them to get enough oil underway, enough expertise on drilling and how to do it to say that we were officially an oil boom. And that was 1881, which Sue will be talking about after I'm done. Let's see if this works. Have patience, I'm the first one, you know. Okay. Well, look at that time period when things were just getting started. Now today, McKean County occupies an area just a little over 1,000 square miles, and there was roughly about 50,000 permanent residents, and I know that went down a little bit in the last census. McKean County has more people than any other county in the northern tier, except Erie County. And the city of Bradford is the largest and the most important community in all of the northern tier, again, except for Erie. Bradford and its adjacent area contains nearly 50% of the county population. It's all right here in the Bradford Township, Foster Township area. By 1800, let me see if I can. By 1800, there were 4,000 producing wells in the Bradford Oil District, yielding 50,000 barrels of oil a day. In addition to the main Bradford field, other fields opened by 1880 included Burning Well, Windfall, Marvin Creek, Guffey, Moody Hollow, West Branch, and the East Kinzoo. Shortly thereafter, the cane fields opened, and by the end of 1881, there were 11,200 producing wells in the field. And in that year, the Bradford field set the all-time maximum production of 23 million barrels. And that is what they call the beginning of the boom. Now, I'm not talking about the boom, I'm talking about before the boom. And here's one of the pictures that is a classic photograph of Bradford before oil actually took hold. And this is about 1847. This is a picture of boys playing baseball in the square, and it's taken roughly from where today Emory Towers sits. And you're looking down, and that hill in the background is Mount Robb. Now, this picture is taken about 1847. And you don't see any oil derricks in the background here. And for years, I thought it wasn't possible that this picture was taken in 1847. To be honest, photography was only invented about 1835. And I'm thinking, really? Within 10 years, it managed to get to a little tiny town in northern Pennsylvania and generate this photograph? But it's true. We did find out later this is done in 1847. This is the one of the first known pictures of Bradford. Now, the modern era of oil production began on August 27th of 1859 when Edwin Drake drilled the first successful oil well 69 feet deep near Titusville in northwestern Pennsylvania. And I know in 1959, my father took us kids down to Titusville to see the Drake well. And my sister, who knows literally nothing about oil, she was talking to me the other day. She goes, "Yeah, remember when we went to Titusville to see the oil well?" I went, "Titusville?" I said it was Titusville. She goes, "Oh, are you sure?" I'm like, I'm pretty positive, Lynn. Pretty positive. It's Titusville. You ought to go there sometime. 5 years earlier, the invention of the kerosene lamp, and I just found this out. The invention of the kerosene lamp had ignited intense demand for oil. By drilling an oil well, Drake had hoped to meet the growing demand for oil for lighting and industrial lubrication. And whale oil was, you know, kaput. That was it. Oil was going to be it. Now, I threw this in just for commercial sake. Brought to you by the Pengrad Oil Museum, these beaches. So anyway, this is a picture of 1847, 1849. This is what Littleton looked like, and that circled area is the Bradford House. And the Bradford House is an important architectural house in this time period because this is where, let me go back here. There we are, okay. This is where a lot of the big oil deals were made, is in the Bradford House. Now Littleton, and this is one of the few pictures we believe actually exists of Littleton. This may be Levitt Little's house, we don't know. In 1837, Colonel Levitt Little, this is a brief history of the city, he purchased 250,000 acres of land in and around Bradford. It only wasn't called Bradford, of course, it was just this chunk of land in northern Pennsylvania, and he built a log house. In 1838, the village was surveyed and named Littleton, and in 1851, a large tract was sold to Daniel Kingsbury, and in that year, we look forward to the first faint beginnings of the city. In 1858, the name Littleton was set aside and the present name chosen. Efforts to build a town were rewarded with very limited results. During the Civil War, the oil fever penetrated the valley and new hopes were built up, only to be cast down after the war. A series of disappointments waited on the attempt to find oil, but amid all such reverses, men came and remained, a few of which, in the after years, took a foremost place among those to whom the honor of developing the resources of this region is credited. They decided to carve out a home in this valley and fashion out a city in the forest, which would one day be regarded as the goal of enterprise. A city sprung out of an ancient forest, extending from hill to hill and stretching down the valley. In 1873, people asked for a borough government, and the demand was granted. Within 3 years, 1876, the locality was filled with busy men, and oily ocean was yielding up its wealth of petroleum. The forest fell, and in its place, hundreds of houses and 1,000 derricks grew up, as it were. Now that's a short paragraph from a book called The History of McKean, Cameron, Elk, and Powder Counties by J.H. Beers. And if you've never read it, it's like 4 inches thick, and it's very detailed. The full name is The History of McKean, Elk, Cameron, Powder, Pennsylvania, with biographical selections, including the early settlement and development, a description of the historic and interesting localities, sketches of their cities, towns, and villages, biographies of representative citizens, and an outline of Pennsylvania and statistics. So there's a title. We have several of these down at the Bradford Landmark Society, and they're also online through Google Books if you care to read one. And that's a quick history on the beginning of Littleton. And again, we may or may not be Littleton's house, we're not sure, but this is believed to be Littleton. This is from a tintype. It's not in very good shape.
Sally?
Yeah.
At Bradford, as we know it, where was Littleton?
Right downtown Main Street.
Was it?
Yeah, Littleton is, they believe his cabin was on the corner of Pine and Main.
Okay.
Now, that's a quick history of the settlement. Now this is Bradford in 1876. Again, this is a very famous photograph. It was done by a man who took 2 photographs, one in 1876, one in 1878. This one is the 1876 one. It's taken from the top of Quintuple Mountain, which for those of, I assume everyone knows which one Quintuple is. It's the one above Westbourne Street and above South Avenue. It's that long, long hill that basically has 5 ridges, it's Quintuple Mountain. It's taken from there, and as you notice, there's just a stump. There's no trees there. Now, that circle is the Bradford House. Again, we're going to talk about the Bradford House. Louis Emery is known to have made a lot of business deals on the second floor of the Bradford House. You can see there's not much there. It would be roughly where Destinations is today, on the corner of Main and Mechanic Street, right on the square, is where the Bradford House was. And that's the same place up close. You can see it's quite a large place. And there's a oil derrick in the back, and this right here is the creek. I don't know if you see that cursor moving across there or not. Now here's the Bradford House. It was central to early oil boom in Bradford. The first official oil exchange won't be built for several more years. So this is the Bradford House. These are men. Notice the mud streets. Now, I did a thing not too long ago with Bradford era on how much mud existed in the town, and this is it. Bradford grows. Now this is again Frank Robbins, same picture. I wanted to show you this. This church is roughly where the parking lot of on the corner of South Avenue and pardon me? Yes. Now watch where the church is now. Same church in 2 years. That gives you an indication of the growth. Now there's an old saying where they say don't invent the wheel, so I took that to heart, and I want to read an excerpt on a report from the McKean County Planning Commission done in 1982. It was called A Brief History of the County of McKean. It's fairly accurate too. As early as 1861, oil had been found in McKean County. However, early wells were drilled only to the approximate depth of the Titusville Oil Creek discoveries. Oil in commercial quantities was not found. Explorers had no geological information and no reason to expect that oil would be found any deeper. We're talking 1860 here. However, there was some oil found in the shallow sands, and drilling continued. By 1865, exploratory wells were pushed to nearly 900 feet, but they were still about 200 feet short to strike substantial deposits. The first significant find in the Tuna Valley was at the Foster Farm, 2 weeks northeast of Bradford. The well struck oil at 1,110 feet and produced 10 barrels a day. And although the well caused some excitement, the activity did not greatly accelerate since production was small compared to Venango County at the time. Late in 1875, the first large producing well in the field was struck northeast of Bradford on the Buchanan Farm, and it was the first big producer, 70 barrels a day, drilled to be in the soon famous Bradford Sand. One of the earliest large producers was the Olmsted well on the Crook Farm, and here's a shout out to the Crook Farm, since that's the Landmark Society, north of Bradford on the Tuna Creek. The activity spread southward to the Foster Brook Tuna confluence. By the end of 1875, several good wells were in production, and the great boom was soon to be on. Now the boom is considered 1881 because that's the year they did 23 million barrels. Now, stereo views, which are great cards, they're photographs that have two photographs, but on the back of those, they often wrote interesting historical information. And this is the back of one of the stereo view cards from May 1st of 1878. This new oil field in the northern part of Pennsylvania embraces portions of McKean County and Cattaraugus County and is about 100 miles from the Oil Creek region. 2 years ago, in 1876, only 150 wells were in operation, 75 of which were drilling. The daily production was 900 barrels. Over 2,500 barrels are now in operation, 500 of which are drilling. The daily production is about 12,000 barrels. The oil is of superior quality and is formed in the third layer of sand rock at an average depth of 1,050 feet. But that's in 1878, and of course I'm supposed to be doing before the boom, so what about 1871? And what I like to do in the Landmark Society, and we do it all the time, is we have a subscription to a webpage called newspaperarchive.com. Now, there is no Bradford newspaper to speak of in 1878. There were a couple small ones, but nothing like the Bradford era. So if you go to the newspaper archive and you look up Titusville, which does have a newspaper in 1871, they often have a lot of interesting things to say about Bradford. And this is what they said on September 11th of 1871 in the Titusville Herald. We hear daily of new strikes and oil development in the new and unexpected localities, and every season the oil belt is extended further and further. Recent events have directed the attention of capitalists and operators to McKean County. Bradford in McKean County, which lies about 50 miles northeast from the Titusville and Triumph tracks, is at present the scene of a great deal of oil excitement. This is the part I like. Bradford is about 12 hours ride from Titusville by rail. 12 hours by rail. And is situated on the Buffalo, Bradford, and Pittsburgh Railroad. A number of oil operators from the Oil Creek region have already taken leases and commenced drilling. Should paying wells be found in Bradford, a great future is before it, as it possesses many of the elements for making a flourishing town. Coal is plentiful there. The mines are only a few miles off, and the railroad already connects Bradford with all the great commercial towns and routes, 12 miles away. Titusville will share the best of this development in the way of supplying engines and oil wells for that region for some time to come. Now, this is 1871. In 5 years, and I read that excerpt, they're not so excited about Bradford because it's tremendous competition. They're not thinking that right now. But you can't build a town or drill for oil without people. And as a result of the oil, the county population exploded from 8,825 people to over 42,000 in 1880, as Dennis remarked, multiplying nearly 5 times in the space of 10 years. Highways and bridges were built, newspapers were formed, churches were built, schools opened, and even a hospital was begun. But where did everyone come from? And I'm not talking about the big oil producers like Lewis Emery and J.T. Jones or those people. I'm talking about the average guy, the average worker, the store owner. Where did those people come from? Well, not surprisingly, many of the people who came to Bradford were Civil War vets hoping to start a new life. Maybe they heard about a new oil field opening up in northern Pennsylvania and decided to give it a try. Maybe they had gone home to Ohio after the war and found out that they weren't that crazy about farming on a farm in Ohio anymore, whereas you could get over to Pennsylvania, many hours away by rail, I might add, and get a good job. And many were foreigners. Now, we're not talking about the Italians, which Bradford is known for. The Italian population in Bradford never really gets here until about 1900, and they come to work in the brick factories in the Lewiston area. The Irish in the area came mostly during the 1850s and 1860s after the potato famine in Ireland in 1845. And my own ancestors, my great-grandparents, came from Ireland following the potato famine and got here about 1850. Irish came to work in the mines, and that's what they did. There were mines up by Malmalton. It's hard to imagine McKean County as coal mine central, but they thought it was going to be at the time. And we had different nationalities. I found a hospital report in 1892, and I know this is like 20 years later, listing the previous year's patient nationalities. There were 89 from the United States, 13 from England, 12 from Italy, 5 from Germany, 1 from France, 6 from Ireland, 5 from Canada, 10 from Sweden, 2 from Scotland, there was 1 from Hungary, 1 from Persia. And this gives you a good idea of not only different nationalities in Bradford, but the different languages that were being talked at the same time. So you head to Bradford by train, and when you get there, what do you find? And the best way to learn about those days before the boom are to read the words of a man who actually lived it. John J. McLaurin was a reporter, and he wrote several books, including one called Sketches in Crude Oil. And if you can find a copy, if you can't find a copy, it can be found and downloaded on the Google Books. It's fascinating. He is a very good writer, he's very humorous, and he was in this area for about 30 years. Anyway, McLaurin is reporting all through the oil region Here is what he said, and oh, he is also the man who coined the term Bad Bradford. Now, scarcely had the Crocker well tanked its initial spurt ere the fun grew fast and furious. Rigs multiplied like rabbits in Australia. Trainloads of lively delegates from every nook and cranny of oildom crowded the streets, overran the hotels, and taxed the commissary of the village to the utmost. Town lots were sold at New York City prices, and buildings spread into the field. At the Bradford House, headquarters of the oil fraternity, operators and landowners met, and drillers off tour solaced their craving for the good things of this life by playing billiards and practicing at the hotel bar. Hundreds of big contracts were closed in the second-story room where Lewis Emery, Judge Johnson, Dr. Book, and the advance guard of the invading host assembled. Main Street blazed at night with the light of dram shops and the gaieties incidental to a full-fledged frontier town. Noisy bands appealed to lovers of varieties to patronize barn-like theaters. Strains of siren music floated from the beer gardens. Dance halls of dubious complexion were thronged, and gambling dens ran unmolested. The free and easy air of the community, too intent chasing oil and cash to bother about morality, captivated the ordinary stranger and gained Bad Bradford notoriety as a combination of pinhole and petroleum center with a dash of Sodom and Gomorrah condensed into a single package. And in February of 1879, the city charter was granted. Now, I have about 20 photographs of those early days, and I'd like to go through them. This is standing in the intersection of East and West Corydon on Congress Street. And they're looking down. This is the oil exchange. Now it's Northwest Savings Bank, and those are actually one in the same building. This is the Tuna Valley House. It will burn down. There's a theater over here, also that one of those things they're talking about. And right here, this is indeed a mud hole. This is mud, nothing but. The Whitney Wheeler Bank. This is near the head of Main Street. Right here is where St. James Place is, and Emery Towers are right here. This bank may look familiar to you because we have a replica of it built down at the Crook Farm. The American House. This is the intersection of South Kendall, North Kendall, and East Main Street. This house was a very popular place. This is one of my favorite oil pictures. This is the Jackson Walker well. And the man right here is on crutches. And I always wondered if he wasn't a Civil War person, because he's an older man and he's on crutches. This is the first oil exchange built in 1877, and this is roughly where PNC Bank is today. And I have an article written about the first oil exchange, which is not, it's sort of after the Bradford House burns. The oil exchange is the most important and certainly the busiest place in Bradford. It has a large two-story building of wood located in the central part of town. It was built by the gentlemen who occupy it. It was not regularly organized as an exchange, but they banded together as a mere society. An organization will probably be perfected sometime this spring. Those interested in it are operators and producers who put up the building for their own convenience. The first floor from front to rear is divided into offices or pens, separated by each other by a railing 3 feet or so in height, a gate swinging inward for entrance. Sort of like cubicles today. Each of these pens is about 12 feet square. The furniture consists of a safe, a desk, and 2 or 3 chairs, and the only decorations on the wall are maps of the oil-producing territory. Here is transacted most, if not all, of the business of the territory in that region. Oil is bought, sold, lands leased, and contracts made. The second floor, this is interesting, the second floor is used as a sleeping room by members of the exchange, and the whole building is heated, lighted, and cared for, each member contributing his share to the common good. An exchange similar to this, in the manner of it, is to be built at Tarport and another one at Limestone. Let's move on here to some of the other. This is a picture looking down Main Street. This will be Emery Towers. This again, this is a horse and mud. This is Congress Street, Main, I don't know if you can see that or not. And yes, those are sheep coming down. We believe Mechanic Street. We believe this is Mechanic Street Bridge back in this area.
We can't see where you're pointing south.
Okay, I will just have to, I don't have a, this is a really bad, it's from a tin type. And what's interesting, the building in the middle says boarding house, and this is exactly where you would live if you were one of those early oil workers. You would come in, there were so many people that were working at that point that they would have 3 or 4 people to a room, and when those men got up and went, the next batch would come in and take the same bed and sleep there. This is roughly where Tops Market is today. Again, this is a scene on Main Street, looking down towards Congress. This would roughly be where Cummins Country Store is today. And again, notice the streets are in terrible shape. And this is roughly, almost exactly, where the St. Bernard's Rectory is today. This is John Lay's machine shop. Further down, there's a church far down on the left. That is the Methodist Church. And, all these buildings that you see will all be gone by the time and most of them burned to the ground. Of course, this is the notorious Pig Island, where all that fun was that people went to. Pig Island is not really an island, of course. It was between Mechanic Street, Charlotte Avenue, nowadays East Washington Street, Walker Avenue. It's the creek is on one side. I assume it was swampy enough that they decided it was called Pig Island, and I assume that they had pigs running wild there at the time because, you know, the connotation of pig is not exactly known back then. This was where all the notorious women lived. You can see some of them in this picture. A lot. Houses of ill repute. And of course, I couldn't end my speech without a picture of the Herbig Bakery, which is where I live most of my time. I'm down at the bakery. Now the man in the front, the large man sitting there, is Celeste Gall. He's French, again a foreigner who's come to town, and he will pack up all those children that are his, and they're going to go to Buffalo. And he will open a bakery up there, and he comes back a couple times. But the interesting thing about Celeste Gall is, for years, Larry Richmond and I, who was my co-worker, he died about 10 years ago, but we believed and honestly thought we had read this, that Celeste Gall had died in the San Francisco earthquake in 1906. Only to our surprise, when he came back in 1909 to the Old Home Week. And we're like, oh, oh. Yes, he didn't do it. And in closing, I want to read an article, again from the Titusville Herald, which is 4 years later, in 1875. Now, Titusville, at this point, is no longer encouraged by the McKean County oil strikes. They're actually hoping they're not going to be successful because they want Titusville to be successful. And they're always a little bit snarky in the newspaper when they talk about Bradford. And this is in October 13th. And the Bradford Oil District is at present assuming an importance that is more imaginary than real. The reports received day to day are so conflicting and at times so contradictory as to produce the effect of mystifying rather than enlightening the public mind. Here is the truth. In the years 1859 and 1860, the Bradford Oil Company, composed mostly of residents of that vicinity, undertook to put a well down by the crude process of kicking it down with a spring pole. After drilling 300 feet, this was finally abandoned. 2 other wells were drilled in 1864, one on the east branch of the creek, about 4 miles from Bradford, and the other on the Blair Farm on the west branch of the creek, about 2 miles above the village. Both proved to be a failure. About this time, another well was drilled on the Clark Farm, to the depth of 800, with a show of oil, but was also abandoned. In 1880 to 1873, the following wells were drilled. 1 well by Foster and Company on the Hinchy Farm, which has been abandoned. 3 wells known as the Buchanan, Fagundes, and Butts wells, starting at 25 to 30 barrels, but are now reduced. About 100 yards directly west of Crocker's dry hole, Mr. Olmsted struck a well in August. This produced from 160 to 180 barrels, and it's gone over as 200, but is now producing less than 50 barrels. This brings us to the period of recent development, which includes a dry hole drilled by Mr. Crocker on the main creek, and I must not forget to mention that at a previous time, 3 wells were drilled 4 or 5 miles directly south of Bradford. These are the Salem, the King, and the DeGolia Company well, and all have been abandoned. So yeah, Titusville is not happy at this point, or to you, as the case may be.